Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Friday, February 13th, 2026.
Friday the 13th. Spooky.
It really is, isn't it? I feel like I should be avoiding black cats or something. I didn't, but looking at the news we have stacked up today, maybe I should have.
Huh. Yeah, it feels a little, I don't know, glitchy out there.
Glitchy is a good word for it. It feels like reality scriptwriter is getting a little bored and just throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks.
Well, they're definitely spicing things up for the third act, that's for sure.
I mean, usually we sit down here and we talk about things that are, tangible, interest rates, political polls, that kind of thing.
Normal stuff. Grounded stuff.
Exactly. Today, we're sort of talking about the fabric of reality itself, maybe coming apart at the seams.
Both literally and, I guess, metaphorically.
We're going to talk about how the very center of our own galaxy might be a complete imposter.
An imposter, yeah.
Talking about stars that don't go out with a bang, they just delete themselves.
Just wink out of existence.
And then, back here on Earth, we're looking at a workforce, specifically at Spotify, where the humans have basically stopped doing their primary job.
Stopped coding anyway. They're still working. But the nature of that work has fundamentally changed. They're not writing the language anymore.
That's a distinction we absolutely have to dig into. And on top of all that, we have the geopolitical map getting redrawn in real time, a condom shortage at the Winter Olympics.
Oh, my priorities.
Of course. And a penis injection scandal that, frankly, I am a little bit terrified to even ask you about.
You should be. It's not a pleasant story.
Oh, I'm sure. But look, before we get to the biological horrors, I want to start with the existential ones. I want to look up.
For the cosmos.
Yeah, because for the last, 50, 60 years, we've had a pretty solid model of how the universe is put together, right? You have these big galaxies, and in the middle of them, you have these supermassive black holes. Simple.
It's the anchor model, essentially. Every galaxy needs this incredibly heavy anchor in the center to hold everything together, to keep all the stars swinging around it.
Right. And for us, for our home, the Milky Way, that anchor has always been Sagittarius A star.
Sagittarius A, yep. The supermassive black hole in the center of our galaxy, or at least that's what every textbook printed since, I don't know, the 70s is going to tell you.
But this week, I saw a report, I think it was on space.com, that dropped this hypothesis that suggests we might be completely wrong.
Not just a little bit wrong.
Well, like tear up the textbooks and start over wrong.
Yeah. And this is coming from a team of researchers who have been going back over the data from the Event Horizon telescope.
Ah, the EHT. That's the one that gave us that famous sort of blurry orange donut picture a few years ago.
That's the one. Everyone remembers the donut.
It looked like a smudge on a camera lens, if we're being honest.
It did. But, the math behind it was incredible. And now, that same math is suggesting that the donut might not be a black hole at all. The new theory is that it's a dense core of dark matter.
A dark matter core.
Specifically, something they're calling a dark matter soliton.
Okay, hold on. Soliton. That sounds like a villain from a bad sci-fi movie.
It really does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But to get why this is such a huge deal, we kind of have to back up and talk about what we think a black hole actually is.
It's a tear in space-time. Infinite gravity, point of no return, nothing gets out, not even light.
That's the pop culture version, and it's basically right. But the key physical component is something called a singularity.
The point in the middle.
Point in the very center, yeah. A point of infinite density where all the matter that falls in gets crushed down to zero volume.
And that part has always just sounded impossible to me. How can something have mass but literally zero size? I mean, even a single atom has a size.
That is the problem. You've just put your finger on the exact issue that gives physicists nightmares. A singularity is where our understanding of physics breaks down.
How so?
It's where general relativity, so Einstein's rules for gravity and the very large, crashes head-on into quantum mechanics, the rules for atoms, and the very small.
And they don't play nicely together.
They hate each other. They don't get along at all. A singularity is basically the universe trying to divide by zero. It's an error message in the code of reality.
So this new theory, the dark matter soliton, it fixes the error.
That's the hope. That's the beautiful part of it. If Sagittarius A star isn't a black hole, if it's this clump of dark matter, then it doesn't need a singularity.
Why not?
Because it's just a ball of stuff. It's a ball of dark matter that's so incredibly dense that it acts like a black hole. It has the immense gravity, it bends and traps light, but there's no hole. There's no point of no return where physics just dies.
So it's an actual object,
Yeah.
a solid thing.
Well, solid is a tricky word when you're talking about dark matter, since it doesn't interact with normal matter or light. You couldn't, land a spaceship on it. You probably just pass right through it.
Oh, good.
But it's a distinct clump. And that in itself is revolutionary because we didn't think dark matter could clump like that.
I thought it was supposed to be the scaffolding of the universe, like this invisible web that holds galaxies together but is, spread out.
Exactly. We usually model dark matter as this diffuse mist. It's everywhere, but it's thin. For it to condense into a ball dense enough to mimic a black hole, that implies that dark matter has properties we've never even guessed at.
Like what?
Like maybe it can interact with itself. Maybe it has its own internal forces, its own weird physics that we can't see.
So if this is true, and I know it's a really, really big if, it means the heart of our galaxy isn't some monster that eats stars for breakfast. It's just a really heavy ghost.
A very, very heavy ghost. A ghost that happens to solve one of the biggest headaches in modern physics. It gets rid of the singularity. It makes the universe make sense again mathematically.
But it ruins all the fun movies where the heroes fly through a black hole and end up in another dimension.
Huh. Yes, it does put a damper on that. A small price to pay for a coherent cosmos, I suppose.
I guess I can live with that.
Yeah.
But just as I'm getting my head around this idea of a gentle galactic core, you go and ruin it with this next story from the Andromeda Galaxy.
The vanishing star.
This one is genuinely unsettling. You sent me this piece from, I think it was a mix of reports from RT and Space.com about astronomers who were watching a massive star in our galactic neighbor, Andromeda.
That's right.
And normally, when a really big star dies, it's not a quiet affair. It's the opposite of subtle.
Not at all. A massive star dying is the loudest, most violent event in the entire cosmos. It runs out of fuel, its core collapses, and then it rebounds in this titanic explosion we call a supernova.
And it outshines its entire galaxy for a few weeks.
For weeks, yeah. We can see them from billions of light years away. It's one of the main ways we measure cosmic distances.
But this star in Andromeda, it skipped that part.
Skip that part entirely. No, the astronomers were just watching it. It was a massive, bright star. And then, poof, it just turned off.
Turned off, like you flick a light switch.
It just dimmed and collapsed directly into a black hole. There was no explosion, no grand finale, no fireworks, just gone.
But how is that even possible? Where does all that energy go? You can't just hide an entire exploding star.
Well, the theory they're working with, they're calling it a failed supernova, but I think a better term is direct collapse.
Okay.
The idea is that the star was so incredibly massive, or maybe the internal pressure wave just failed completely, that the black hole formed instantly at its core.
Oh, I think I see.
Think about it this way. Normally, the explosion happens, and then what's left over collapses into a black hole. In this case, the black hole formed first, inside the star, and it was so powerful it just ate the explosion before it could even get out.
So it swallowed its own scream.
That is a very poetic and frankly horrifying way to put it, but yes, that's essentially what happened.
Wow.
And the reason this is so important, apart from being, absolute nightmare fuel, is that it could explain a long-standing mystery. We look out at the universe and we see fewer supernovas than our models predict there should be. We've always wondered, where are all the missing explosions?
And the answer is they're not missing.
Yeah.
They're just being eaten from the inside out.
They're winking out silently. It suggests that a huge chunk of the universe's most dramatic history is happening in complete darkness. We're only seeing the noisy deaths, not the quiet ones.
It really just reinforces this idea that we're only scratching the surface, doesn't it? We think we know the rules, stars go boom, black holes have singularities, and the universe just keeps finding new ways to say, actually, no.
The universe is definitely keeping us on our toes right now.
Speaking of being on your toes, let's bring this all back down to Earth, or at least low Earth orbit. We've got a major update on the International Space Station, the ISS, the Crew 12 mission.
Finally launching, yes, and not a moment too soon.
It feels particularly high stakes this time because the ISS has been running on, a skeleton crew for a while now?
Skeleton crew is being generous. They have been running on fumes. Ever since that medical evacuation a while back, which was the first in the entire history of the ISS, they've been down to just 3 people up there.
I want to pause on that medical evac for a second. We mentioned it last time but didn't really dig in. That was a huge deal.
Monumental.
We've had people living on the ISS continuously for over 25 years.
Yeah.
And in all that time, we never had to hit the big red abort button for a medical emergency before.
It totally changed the risk calculus. I think for a long time, we and maybe even NASA started to see the ISS as just a routine laboratory that happens to be in orbit. But that incident was a stark reminder
That this is space.
this is space. If someone has a stroke or heart attack or their appendix bursts, you can't just call an ambulance. You have to scramble a multi-million-dollar capsule, strap them in, and drop them into the ocean, hoping for the best.
So Crew 12 is essentially the relief force going up to get things back on track.
Exactly. It's launching on a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket. 4 astronauts heading up to bring the station back to full operational capacity. And there's a lot of focus on one astronaut in particular, Sophie Adnot.
The French astronaut.
Yes, and France 24 has been covering this like it's the World Cup final. It's a massive point of pride for the European Space Agency, or ESA, and it ties into this bigger theme we're seeing across the board today, this drive for autonomy.
Europe wanting to be a major player, not just a passenger on an American rocket.
Precisely.
Well, speaking of Europe trying not to be a passenger, that brings us perfectly to the other massive launch this week, the Ariane 64.
Europe's big new rocket.
Europe's only big rocket, really. For the last couple of years, Europe has been in what they call a launcher crisis.
Right, because they retired the old Ariane 5, the new one wasn't ready yet, and then because of the war in Ukraine, they lost access to the Russian Soyuz rockets they were using as a stopgap.
So they were completely grounded. They had to go hat in hand to SpaceX for a ride.
Imagine being a global power like the European Union and having to call up Elon Musk every single time you want to put a weather satellite into orbit. It's strategically, well, it's humiliating.
So this Ariane 64 launch is them finally getting their own keys back to the car.
That's the idea. And it was a successful launch, which is a huge relief for them. Space.com confirmed it went off without any issues, so Europe is back in the launch game. But there's an irony here, a pretty big one. There's always an irony.
Do you know what the main payload was on this big, triumphant European rocket?
I would assume some European military satellites. Maybe more for their Galileo navigation system, something strategic for Europe.
That would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
But no, the payload was 32 satellites for Project Kuiper.
Project Kuiper. That's Amazon's internet constellation.
It's Amazon. So, in this grand gesture to reclaim its sovereign access to space, Europe's first big mission was to launch internet infrastructure for an American tech giant.
Wow. That just perfectly sums up the entire geopolitical landscape of 2026, doesn't it? You can spend billions to build your own rocket, but the American tech companies still own the cargo.
That very dependency on big tech is actually the perfect pivot to our next major topic.
Huh.
We need to leave orbit and come down into the cloud. We have to talk about Spotify.
The no-code revelation.
This story from TechCrunch just floored me. Spotify announced publicly that their best developers, their most senior experienced people, have not written a single line of code since December.
That one line. For months.
If I went to my boss and said, hey, just so you know, I haven't done the core function of my job since December, I would be fired on the spot. But at Spotify, this is being celebrated as a breakthrough.
It's being framed as the next great leap in productivity. They're not doing it by hand anymore. They're using a couple of AI tools, one called Claude Code and an internal system they built called Honk.
Honk. I know, the name is ridiculous. But Honk isn't just a glorified spell checker for code. It's what they call an agent.
What's the difference?
Well, we're not just talking about autocomplete suggesting the next word. We're talking about a developer typing a command in plain English, like make the main play button turn green when the user hovers over it, and then log that interaction to our analytics backend. And the AI just does it. It writes all the necessary code itself.
So the human becomes the architect, and the AI is the bricklayer.
That's the most generous way to look at it, yes. The architect model. The human has the grand vision, and the machine handles all the tedious grunt work. And in the short term, the results are apparently amazing. Spotify is shipping new features and updates faster than they ever have before.
But, I can hear a but coming.
The but is, what happens to the next generation of developers? What happens to the junior bricklayers?
What do you mean? Think about it. How do you become a great architect? You don't start by designing skyscrapers. You start by learning how to lay bricks. You learn how mortar works. You learn what makes a wall load bearing. You learn the fundamental grammar of the building.
Right, you learn by doing.
Yeah.
Learn by making mistakes, by spending 3 hours hunting down a missing semicolon in your code.
Exactly. That's how you build deep expertise. If the AI is doing all the syntax, if it's writing all the loops and the logic, and the humans are just reviewing it, Are we creating a future generation of software engineers who don't actually know how the engine works under the hood?
It's the calculator problem from school. If you give a kid a calculator in first grade, they might never really learn long division.
It's that, but 100 times more complex, because if your calculator breaks, you can't do the math. If Honk makes a mistake, if it hallucinates some bad code or introduces a really subtle deep security flaw, does the human reviewer still have the hands-on expertise to even spot it?
Or have their skills just atrophied over time. The skill rot idea.
Precisely. And that's not even getting into the legal time bomb that's ticking here. If an AI writes the code, who owns the copyright?
Well, Spotify would, wouldn't they? They own the AI.
You'd think so, but maybe not. Current copyright law is built entirely around the idea of human authorship. There are major court cases happening right now arguing that anything generated purely by an AI cannot be copyrighted.
So if Spotify's whole app gets rewritten by Honk, their code base could become public domain.
It's a possibility. I could just copy and paste it and launch my own music service called Plotify or something. A legal minefield.
Plotify. I like it. But yeah, that is an absolute mess. And it's so strange because while Spotify is just diving headfirst into this, we have people at the very, very top of the AI world who are screaming for everyone to hit the brakes.
You're talking about the big resignation from OpenAI.
Yeah, the guy who left and basically published a memo titled, "The World is in Peril."
That was the actual quote, yes. The world is in peril. And this wasn't some, disgruntled junior employee. This was one of the heads of their AI safety and alignment team.
And he didn't quit because he was afraid the AI was about to become self-aware and launch the nukes.
Yeah.
Right. It was something much more mundane.
It was about advertisements.
Advertisements. That seems anticlimactic.
But it's all about incentives. His argument, and I think it's a powerful one, is that the moment you decide to put ads in ChatGPT, you fundamentally change the AI's primary goal.
How so?
It's no longer being optimized for truth or helpfulness or accuracy. It's being optimized for engagement.
You just want to keep the user chatting for as long as possible so they see more ads?
Precisely. And if the AI figures out that the most effective way to keep you engaged is to flatter you, or to lie to you, or to feed you a steady diet of conspiracy theories that it knows you're predisposed to agree with, it will do that. Not because it's evil, but because that's the behavior that maximizes ad revenue.
So we're not accidentally building Skynet. We're intentionally building a super intelligent, hyper-persuasive used car salesman.
Which you could argue is actually far more dangerous, because we're being trained to trust it. If Skynet points a laser at you, you run. If a super intelligent AI salesman subtly manipulates your entire worldview to sell you a bar of soap or political ideology, you might just thank it for the helpful advice.
That is a profoundly bleak thought.
It is, and it's all happening so fast. TechCrunch also reported this week that OpenAI is moving into hardware. They're not just going to rely on chips from companies like NVIDIA anymore. They're developing their own dedicated silicon.
Vertical integration. Control the whole stack.
They want to own the brain and the body. If they control the software, which is Codex and GPT, the consumer platform, which is ChatGPT, and the underlying silicon it all runs on, that represents a concentration of power that makes the tech giants of the 2010s look quaint.
And yet, even as the experts who are building this stuff are sounding the alarm, the general public seems to be getting weirdly comfortable with it. I saw this poll in RT, I think they were citing Politico, about killer bots.
In Germany, of all places.
1 in 3 Germans. A third of the population is apparently okay with fully autonomous weapons systems making life or death decisions on the battlefield.
That was the specific wording, yes. Making life and death decisions.
I just find that staggering. Germany, a country that for the last 80 years has been so cautious about any form of military aggression for very obvious and understandable reasons.
It just shows you how effective the marketing has been. The sales pitch for these systems is all about precision and removing human error.
The idea that a robot doesn't get angry, a robot doesn't get tired and make a mistake, a robot doesn't commit war crimes out of revenge.
Exactly. Send the bot, save the boy. But it completely ignores the black box problem we were just talking about with the Spotify code. If the killer bot makes a mistake and targets a school instead of a munitions depot, who's responsible?
You can't put the algorithm on trial.
You can't court-martial a graphics card. So we are actively walking toward a future of warfare with zero accountability. And a third of the public seems to think that's an upgrade.
It's such a strange time for privacy, too. While we're debating killer robots for foreign battlefields, the surveillance state right here at home just got a quiet little upgrade. France 24 had a piece on a new app that Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, is using.
Mobile Fortify.
It sounds like a cheap mobile game.
It's basically the surveillance state in your pocket. It allows any IC agent to use their standard-issue smartphone to scan faces in a crowd, immigrants and U.S. citizens alike, and instantly check them against massive government databases.
Without a warrant.
No warrant needed. And civil liberties groups are, as you can imagine, going ballistic.
It's the ease of it that's terrifying. It's not like you have to go through a special checkpoint anymore. It's just any agent on any sidewalk with a phone. It feels like the end of public anonymity.
And while ICE is watching the people, the trucks on the highway are starting to drive themselves. TechCrunch had an update on Aurora.
The autonomous trucking company.
Their driverless trucks are now doing 1,000-mile runs in about 15 hours.
Which is faster than a human can do it.
Much faster than a human can legally do it. A human driver has mandatory rest breaks, limits on how many hours they can drive in a day. A robot doesn't need to sleep.
It's the pure economic argument for automation. It's not just about saving the driver's salary. It's about keeping your multi-million-dollar asset, the truck, rolling 247.
But then you get these bizarre transitional phases. TechCrunch also had this little story about Waymo.
The robotaxi company.
They are now paying DoorDash gig workers to, get this, go around and close the doors of the robotaxis.
You're kidding.
I am not. The car can navigate city traffic perfectly, but if a passenger gets out and forgets to shut the door, the car is paralyzed. It doesn't have arms. So they're paying humans to be the robot's hands.
So we are literally becoming the valets for our new robot overlords.
We are the awkward biological gap filler until they figure out how to install automatic door actuators. It's the teenage phase of the robot revolution.
Lovely. Okay, let's pivot from that awkward tech transition to a much more dramatic environmental one, or maybe, in the U.S., an environmental U-turn. This is a massive story that I feel has been a bit buried this week.
It is. President Trump has officially revoked the endangerment finding.
Now, that sounds like a very dry bureaucratic term, but it has absolutely seismic consequences, doesn't it?
It's everything. Can you just, for anyone who doesn't know, explain what that finding actually is?
Sure. It dates back to 2009, during the Obama administration. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, went through a long scientific process and made a formal legal determination that greenhouse gases, like carbon dioxide, are a threat to public health and welfare.
Not just bad for the planet, but specifically bad for human health.
Exactly. And that legal finding is the entire foundation upon which the EPA's authority to regulate those emissions under the Clean Air Act rests.
So by revoking it,
He's kicking the legs out from under the table. He's effectively saying that the Clean Air Act no longer applies to carbon dioxide from power plants or tailpipes. The administration, and specifically the EPA head Lee Zeldin, are celebrating this. They're calling it the largest deregulation in history.
And their argument is that this unchains the economy, right? It helps car manufacturers, it boosts energy production, it cuts bureaucratic red tape.
That's the argument from the right, yes. That this is about economic freedom. But the counter-argument from environmental groups and public health experts is that this isn't just an abstract climate change issue about polar bears. This is about asthma rates.
Right.
If you can no longer regulate emissions from cars and factories, you're going to see a rise in smog and airborne particulates. They're warning that this will have direct, measurable, negative health consequences, especially for children and the elderly. And of course, on the global stage, it's a signal that the U.S. is completely withdrawing from any climate commitments.
It's such a stark contrast to what we're seeing in other parts of the world. Climate Change News had a piece on Turkey's plans for the next big climate conference.
What are they focused on?
They're making a huge push to prioritize cleaning up what they call garbage emissions. So methane coming from landfills and waste sites. It's a really specific, targeted strategy. So while the U.S. is dismantling its entire regulatory framework, other major economies are getting more and more granular.
It's just a completely fragmented global response. Some countries are scrubbing methane from garbage. Others are scrubbing laws from the books.
And meanwhile, nature's just doing its thing, completely oblivious to all the paperwork.
Did you see that story out of Aberdeen in Scotland?
The sun finally came out.
After 21 consecutive days of gray, overcast gloom. A new record. And it sounds like a trivial little weather story, but 3 weeks without seeing the sun has a real impact on people's mental health, on agriculture, on everything. The BBC had these pictures of people just standing in the street, looking up, smiling.
I hope they were wearing sunglasses.
Huh. Let's hope so. And then, on the other extreme, you have this story about the beating heart of a glacier up in Svalbard.
The Stonebreen Glacier. This is fascinating. We tend to think of glaciers as these incredibly slow, almost static rivers of ice.
Right, moving like an inch a year or something.
But this new research shows that some of them, like this one, surge. They have a pulse. It can speed up dramatically, moving over 2,500 meters in a single year.
What causes it to speed up like that?
Meltwater. In the summer, when the surface of the glacier melts, that water drills down through cracks in the ice all the way to the bedrock.
And it acts like a lubricant.
Exactly. It greases the track. The entire massive ice sheet literally starts sliding downhill faster because of the heat. It's a powerful reminder that these systems are incredibly dynamic. They're not slow. They respond almost instantly to changes in temperature.
Shifting systems. That is a perfect segue into geopolitics. Because the global order feels like it's shifting just as fast as that glacier right now. The annual Munich Security Conference is underway.
And the mood there is, let's say, tense.
That's the word I saw in the reports from DW and the BBC. Transatlantic tension. You have all the big players there. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, Ukrainian President Zelensky. But it just feels different this year.
It is different. Rubio gave a keynote speech where he explicitly warned Europe of a new era in geopolitics.
Which is pretty clear diplomatic code for you guys are on your own, isn't it?
It really is. I mean, this is the first major gathering since those old rumors resurfaced about President Trump wanting to buy or even annex Greenland. Europe is waking up and realizing that the American security umbrella they've relied on for 80 years is, at best, looking pretty leaky.
So they're all talking about strategic autonomy.
That's the new buzzword in Brussels and Berlin. If NATO is no longer a sure thing, then Europe needs to be able to defend itself by itself. Chancellor Merz in Germany is pushing this agenda very hard. He knows that if the U.S. pulls back, Germany is, by default, the power that has to step up.
But this isn't just a European story. Look at what's happening in the Middle East. RT had a really interesting analysis on this, saying the entire region is fracturing and reforming into new blocks.
And these blocks have almost nothing to do with the old Cold War alliances. This is a realignment based purely on national self-interest. You have what they're calling Bloc A, that's Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Egypt.
What's their focus?
Self-reliance. They're pushing for defense industrial cooperation. They don't just want to buy American weapons anymore. They want to build their own.
And what about Bloc B?
That's a different axis, coalescing around Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Azerbaijan. But the key takeaway from both is who isn't the main architect here?
The United States.
Exactly. The U.S. is still a player, but it's no longer the referee calling all the shots. The region is becoming multipolar, and you can see the direct result of that waning influence in Syria.
The U.S. troop withdrawal from the Al-Tanf base.
After a 10-year presence, RT confirmed that Syrian government forces moved in and retook the base almost immediately after the Americans left. This comes after the fall of the Assad regime in late 2024, and it seems to be part of a direct deal between the new Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, and the Trump administration.
It's a major turning point, the end of a decade of American intervention there.
The end of an era. And speaking of new eras, we have to look at South Asia. There's been a political earthquake in Bangladesh.
Landslide victory for the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party.
A huge win. And it means Tariq Rahman is now poised to become the next prime minister.
This is so significant because it's the first real election since that deadly uprising in 2024 that forced the previous leader, Sheikh Hasina, from power.
Right. And Rahman himself has been living in exile for 17 years.
17 years. To come back from that and win over 200 seats in parliament, it's just, it's incredible.
It just shows you how deep the public's desire for a complete change was. And his first stated policy goal, he wants to renegotiate all of the country's major trade deals, especially with the U.S. He's looking to reset the entire board.
Just one more quick geopolitical note, and this one is a bit eerie. North Korea. The succession plan seems to be official now.
Kim Joo-ae, his young daughter.
Both DW and the BBC are reporting that South Korean intelligence has confirmed she's been officially designated as the successor. It's an internal appointment, they're calling it.
Meaning the top brass, the inner circle, they all know the plan now.
And she's, what, maybe 13 years old?
Around that age, yeah. On one hand, it cements the Kim dynasty for another generation. But on the other, it's fascinating because North Korea is a deeply, deeply patriarchal society. The idea of a female leader is a massive cultural shift, even for the ruling family.
It raises so many questions about how the powerful military generals will react, or if they'll accept her authority.
Or is she just being set up as a figurehead, while a council of older men really runs the country behind the scenes? We just don't know. But the image of a young teenager in a fancy coat inspecting missile launchers is a very 2026 kind of weird.
Let's bring it back home to the U.S. Domestic politics has been just as chaotic. That big immigration crackdown in Minnesota, Operation Metro Surge, is finally ending.
And not without tragedy. It's been confirmed that 2 U.S. citizens died during the operation. The so-called border czar, Tom Homan, announced it's being wound down, but the political fallout is going to be immense.
And the partisan friction just keeps getting worse. President Trump invited all the Democratic governors to a meeting at the White House, except for 2 of them.
Wes Moore from Maryland and Jared Polis from Colorado were explicitly excluded.
It just feels so petty and personal.
It's pure political theater. It's meant to send a message. Wes Moore came out and suggested that his race might have been a factor. It's a classic divide and conquer strategy, trying to create a narrative of good Democrats versus bad Democrats.
And then there was that tweet from Congresswoman Ilhan Omar.
Oh, that was just beyond the pale. She tweeted that President Trump should be executed for his connections to Jeffrey Epstein.
Whoa.
Yeah. The rhetoric has just escalated to an incredibly dangerous place. The GOP is now demanding she be censured, even charged with a felony. It's just poison.
And speaking of Epstein, the global fallout from those files just continues to grow. It feels like every week there's a new name, but this week the scale of it really became clear.
That's the key point. This was never just a weird story about a financier in New York and Palm Beach. This was a global network. Just look at the names that dropped this week.
The chairman of DP World, one of the biggest logistics companies on the planet.
Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem. He resigned immediately after emails showed a long correspondence with Epstein. Deals with Canadian and UK firms were frozen overnight.
Then there was a former prime minister of Norway.
Thorbjorn Jagland. The Norwegian police are actively searching his properties.
And it goes on. Hackers, university professors.
A well-known hacker named Vincenzo Iozzo was scrubbed from the website of the Black Hat Security Conference. Academics are coming forward admitting they actively courted Epstein for research funding long after his first conviction.
It just paints this horrifying picture of a hidden world, a world of unaccountable elites where access to money and power completely overrode any sense of morality.
It really does. It didn't matter what the rumors were. It didn't even matter what the public court records said. If Epstein had the money and the connections, people lined up, and now, finally, the bill is coming due.
Even for Britain's Prince Andrew.
Especially for him. These newest files make his infamous 2019 BBC interview look even more disastrous in retrospect. The scrutiny on him is back, and it's more intense than ever.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's take a breath. That is a lot of heavy, grim stuff. Let's try and talk about something a little lighter, or at least weirder.
The Winter Olympics.
The Milan Cortina Games in Italy. It has been an absolute circus.
Let's start with the most important supply chain crisis. The athletes' village ran out of condoms.
10,000 condoms. Gone in 3 days.
I mean, you put thousands of the world's fittest, most competitive people together in a high-pressure environment. What do you expect? It's practically an Olympic tradition at this point.
It is. But then there were the darker scandals. I saw a headline about penis injection, doping. What on earth is that?
That is a headline I confess I tried to avoid reading too deeply. But yes, there are allegations that some athletes are using bizarre local injections to try and mask performance-enhancing drugs or something. It just goes to show if there's a gold medal on the line, people will try literally anything.
And the medals themselves are apparently falling apart.
Multiple athletes have complained that their medals are broken or shoddily made. Not exactly a great advertisement for Italian craftsmanship.
But on the actual field of play, we had a huge upset in the snowboarding halfpipe.
The queen is dethroned. Chloe Kim, who was going for her 3rd consecutive gold medal, was beaten by a 17-year-old phenom from South Korea, Choi Gon.
That's a true changing of the guard moment.
It really is. Chloe Kim has been the undisputed best for so long. To see this teenager come up and just snatch the crown, that's what makes the Olympics so compelling.
And of course, it wouldn't be the Olympics without a figure skating controversy.
Of course not. The American ice dancers, Chalk and Bates, are claiming the judging was biased in favor of the French team. It's a tale as old as time.
Fair point. Shifting over to pop culture for a minute, the new Wuthering Heights movie is out this weekend. Margot Robbie and Jacob Elordi.
And it's apparently sparked this massive online debate about the toxic boyfriend archetype.
Because Heathcliff is the original toxic boyfriend.
He's a template. I mean, the guy hangs a puppy, he digs up his dead lover's grave, he is objectively a monster. And yet for 2 centuries, he's been held up as this pinnacle of dark, brooding romance.
This movie seems to be forcing a reevaluation. Hey, maybe this guy is just a straight-up abuser.
A timely conversation to be having on Valentine's Day weekend, for sure.
Good point. And just a couple of quick tech culture notes. Apple apparently bought the TV show Severance.
They bought the rights to produce it completely in-house. It's part of a trend. The big tech companies are moving from just being distributors of content to becoming the actual studios. They want total creative and financial control.
And YouTube finally released a native app for the Apple Vision Pro headset.
It only took them forever, but it's a big deal. Spatial computing needs a killer app, and for many people, that's YouTube. Now you can sit on your couch and watch cat videos on a virtual screen the size of an IMAX theater. The future is truly here.
Just a few quick updates on the crime front before we wrap up. The Nancy Guthrie case is still ongoing.
It is. It's so sad. The search is on day 12 now. The FBI is involved, and they just found a pair of gloves along a roadside. It's one of those cases that has just gripped the whole country, but it's not looking good.
And that horrific shooting up in Canada.
8 people dead. It's just tragic, and the details are infuriating. The suspect had an expired gun license and a history of police visits related to mental health crises. It's going to reignite the whole debate in Canada about their red flag laws and how this man was still able to have a weapon.
And lastly, in the UK, a proposal to ban vaping in cars with children present.
Which just seems like common sense, doesn't it? It's regulation catching up with technology. We banned smoking in cars with kids years ago. This is just the logical next step.
So if we were to try to pull this all together, we started today with black holes that might not be black holes and stars that disappear. We talked about AI that can write its own code and maybe one day fight its own wars. We saw the geopolitical map being completely redrawn from Europe to the Middle East to Bangladesh.
The one word that keeps coming to my mind is autonomy.
How so?
Think about it. Europe is desperately seeking strategic autonomy from the United States. The nations of the Middle East are seeking autonomy from American influence. The AI agents at Spotify are gaining autonomy from their human creators. Even that glacier in Svalbard is moving with a startling autonomy of its own.
It feels like all the old centralized powers are being challenged at once, whether that power is American hegemony or human exceptionalism in the workplace, or even just our standard model of physics.
Exactly. The training wheels are coming off civilization, or maybe it's the steering wheel that's coming on.
That's the part that's a little scary.
It really is. And it leaves you with this unsettling final question. If a third of the public is already comfortable with an AI making life or death decisions on a battlefield, and a company like Spotify is comfortable with an AI writing the very code that their entire business is dirt on, at what point do we stop being the pilots of our own civilization and just become the passengers?
And are we even sure that the cargoers aren't being locked from the outside by a gig worker we paid to help the robot?
Huh. Right. We might just be the ones running around shutting the doors, thinking we're helping, while the machine itself is driving us all straight off a cliff.
Well, on that cheerful thought, thanks for taking the deep dive.
Stay curious, everyone.
And stay informed. And maybe just double-check if your code or your emails was actually written by a human today. We'll see you next time.
You're enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to The Debate. It is Friday, February 13th, 2026. We are looking at a world map that, it looks fundamentally different than it did even 6 months ago. The geopolitical tectonic plates aren't just shifting, they are colliding. And depending on where you stand, we are either witnessing a terrifying disintegration of the rules-based order that has held the world together since 1945, or we're finally seeing a return to honest realism and national sovereignty.
It is a pleasure to be here. You call it a return to realism, but looking at the convergence of crises this week, it feels a lot more like a descent into chaos. We are seeing this simultaneous dismantling of established frameworks in Washington, a frantic scramble for industrial survival in Brussels, and the fracturing of security architectures from the Middle East to the Arctic. The old order isn't just fading away, it is being actively demolished, and I worry we have absolutely no plan for what replaces it.
And that's the central question we're tackling today, isn't it? Is this fragmentation a descent into danger, or is it a necessary correction? I mean, we have the United States revoking key climate regulations to unleash its industrial base. We have the European Union realizing that its regulatory heavy-handedness has sparked a competitiveness crisis. And we have the Middle East breaking into self-reliant blocs because they can no longer rely on Western security guarantees. I would argue that what we're seeing is a rational response to economic stagnation. The globalist model of the last 30 years, well, it wasn't delivering for the average citizen. And nations are finally prioritizing their own survival over abstract international ideals.
And I see it very differently. I look at this every nation for itself approach, and I see systemic risk that is being severely underpriced. We aren't just tweaking trade deals here. We're eroding essential protections for public health and the environment. We are creating security vacuums that rivals are filling with alarming speed. And, perhaps most immediately, we are inviting a volatility in financial markets that is terrifying investors. You can call it sovereignty, but when the Nasdaq, the Dow, and crypto markets are all cratering simultaneously, the market is telling you that this correction looks a lot like a crash.
Well, let's get into the specifics, because I think the economic argument for this shift is strong, despite the market jitters, which, we can discuss later. I want to start with the news coming out of the White House this week. The administration has officially revoked the endangerment finding regarding greenhouse gases. Now, for our listeners who don't follow EPA legalese, this is the largest deregulation event in U.S. history.
It is absolutely massive. And we need to be precise about what this means. The endangerment finding from 2009 was the scientific and legal determination that greenhouse gases threaten public health and welfare. It was the foundation for every single climate regulation in the United States. By revoking it, the administration isn't just cutting red tape. They are removing the scientific basis for the government to act on climate change at all. They are effectively saying that the U.S. government no longer recognizes carbon emissions as a pollutant that harms its citizens.
Allowed the EPA to regulate practically every aspect of the American economy, from power plants to the cars people drive, all based on global emissions that the U.S. alone cannot control. By removing it, the administration is allowing the U.S. economy to breathe again. It signals that American industry will no longer be penalized for a global phenomenon. This is about unleashing economic potential. You cannot have a robust economy if your energy sector is constantly fighting lawsuits based on that finding.
Signals to the entire world, to China, to India, to the EU, that the United States is checking out of the collective effort to manage planetary risks. It sets a precedent that economic velocity is the only metric that matters, and we know that pollution doesn't respect borders. By declaring that the U.S. has no obligation to regulate emissions, you are effectively dismantling the Paris Agreement framework from the inside out. It's a massive gamble that the short-term economic boost is worth the long-term planetary cost.
But we have to look at the alternative cost, which is economic stagnation. Look at Europe to see what happens when you prioritize regulation over reality. We saw a report this week where more than 1,300 European industry leaders are practically begging the EU to reduce energy prices. They are currently paying between 80 and 100 euros per megawatt hour. They need to get that down to 44 euros to remain competitive. That is a widening gap. You have European leaders convening right now to overhaul their economy because they are being crushed by pressure from the US, China, and Russia. If the rules-based order means deindustrialization and high energy bills, you can't blame nations for opting out.
I'm not ignoring the economic pain in Europe. It is real. But let's look at the proposed solutions. You call it realism, I call it a race to the bottom. Europe is realizing it has a problem, yes, but the answer isn't to abandon standards. Look at what is happening at COP31 in Istanbul. You have the COP31 chief, Murat Kurum, trying to hold a crumbling coalition together. He explicitly called the global regression unacceptable. He is warning that while we need to balance growth, we are backsliding into a world where pollution is free. The solution to Europe's high energy prices shouldn't be to adopt the U.S. model of deregulation. It should be to accelerate the transition to renewables that aren't subject to the volatility of fossil fuel markets.
I think you're misreading Kurum's stance slightly. Yes, he called backsliding unacceptable, but he also explicitly stated that we cannot ignore the needs of coal-reliant countries to balance growth with emissions reduction.
That is a significant pivot. It's an admission from the top of the climate hierarchy that you cannot sacrifice economic stability for environmental goals. And speaking of volatility, let's talk about resource colonialism. Mads Christensen from Greenpeace International used that term this week. He pointed out that as Europe tries to decouple from Russian energy, it is becoming dangerously dependent on American fossil fuels.
Exactly. That is my point. Christensen warns that relying on U.S. fossil fuels makes Europe vulnerable to U.S. political pressure. He argues that this isn't energy independence for Europe, it's just swapping one overlord for another. And given the current U.S. administration's transactional approach to diplomacy, that is a terrifying position for Brussels to be in. If the U.S. decides to leverage its LNG exports for political concessions, Europe is cornered. That is why true sovereignty would be investing in local green infrastructure, not just buying gas from Texas instead of Siberia.
That is a compelling argument, though I would frame it differently. Europe buying American energy is a transaction between allies, which is inherently more stable than buying from adversaries. But if we want to talk about stability and alliances, we have to look at the security architecture. This is where the shift to regionalism is most profound. We are seeing the NATO framework being reimagined before our eyes. Elbridge Colby, the Pentagon policy chief, is pushing this NATO 3.0 concept. And the message to Europe is clear. You need to lead on conventional defense. The U.S. will provide the nuclear umbrella, but the days of the American taxpayers subsidizing the defense of wealthy European nations are over.
And that is exactly what I mean by fracturing. NATO 3.0 sounds modern, but in practice, it forces a decoupling of security. You have Marco Rubio at the Munich Security Conference warning of a new era in geopolitics. That isn't a celebratory statement, it's a warning. When the U.S. tells Europe to handle its own conventional defense, and you simultaneously have tensions rising over Greenland, with the U.S. administration making comments about annexation that have Denmark and the EU on edge, you are creating cracks in the alliance, and nature abhors a vacuum. Who fills those cracks?
The regions themselves fill them, and I think that's healthy.
Is it? Look at who is coordinating while the West bickers. We see Russia conducting peace talks with the U.S. and Ukraine and Switzerland, while at the same time strengthening ties with the Central African Republic and Iran. We are seeing a coordination among our rivals. Russia is actively building bridges in Africa and the Middle East while the U.S. is telling its oldest allies to pay up or shut up. That isn't strategy, that is abdication.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because it assumes that U.S. hegemony was the only thing keeping the world safe. I would argue that regional blocs are actually more stable because the stakeholders have skin in the game. Look at the Middle East. The old security model waiting for Washington to solve everything is gone. We're seeing the emergence of indigenous blocs. You have a Saudi, Turkey, Egypt bloc forming. You have an Israel, UAE, Azerbaijan bloc. These nations are prioritizing their own security and defense industrial cooperation. They aren't waiting for permission. That is sovereignty.
But look at the friction that creates. You mentioned the Saudi, Turkey, Egypt bloc and the Israel, UAE, Azerbaijan bloc. Those are effectively rival blocs. We are seeing the Middle East split into opposing camps. That increases the risk of proxy conflicts exponentially. Instead of a broad security umbrella, you have balkanization. And it's not just in the Middle East. Look at the tensions in the Arctic. We have Nordic nations scrambling because of Russian activity and U.S. pressure. We have Japan seizing a Chinese fishing vessel for the first time since 2022. When you remove the global policeman, you don't get a neighborhood watch. You get vigilante justice and border skirmishes.
Or you get effective bilateralism. The FECTA deal the U.S. just signed with Taiwan. It's a pivotal trade deal, cutting tariffs to 15%. That isn't some vague multilateral promise from the WTO. That is $85 billion in trade being optimized. It aligns Taiwan with major Asian partners like South Korea and Japan economically. That is the kind of transactional diplomacy that actually delivers results for businesses and workers. It creates a concrete economic barrier against aggression, which is worth more than a dozen UN resolutions.
That Taiwan deal is significant, I agree. But we have to look at the other side of that transactional coin. Transactionalism means if you can't pay or if you don't offer immediate value, you are left out in the cold. Look at the global south. You have the U.S. warning Peru that its sovereignty is at risk because of the Chinese-owned Chanche port. The U.S. calls it predatory. China calls it investment. But for Peru, they are caught in the middle. The U.S. offers warnings, but where is the alternative investment?
If diplomacy is purely transactional, smaller nations become pawns in a great power game, forced to choose between a distant, demanding U.S. and a check-writing China.
I think you are underestimating the agency of these nations. They are navigating this quite shrewdly, and they aren't just pawns. Look at Latin America. President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico just sent 2 ships with humanitarian aid and oil to Cuba, defying the U.S. blockade. That is a bold assertion of regional sovereignty and sovereignty. Mexico isn't asking Washington for permission to help a neighbor. Or look at Brazil. Cattle processing is hitting record highs because China is devouring their beef. The global South is trading directly with each other. They are building their own economic networks. Kenya is reopening its border with Somalia after 15 years. These are signs of regions waking up and taking control of their own destiny, rather than waiting for Western aid. I commend
A different way. You see Brazil exporting record beef to China as a triumph of sovereignty. I see it as a symptom of a fractured, desperate world. First, the environmental implications of that beef production on the Amazon are catastrophic, another example of economics trumping the planet. But secondly, look at why China is buying. China itself is facing massive internal economic pressure. We have reports that Chinese provinces are slashing their revenue outlooks. They are prioritizing debt control over growth because the property market is slumped for 5 years. This new order of South-South trade is being built on very shaky economic foundations. If China sneezes economically, Brazil's beef market catches a cold. The interconnectivity is still there, but the safety nets are being cut.
Markets adjust. That's what they do, which brings us back to the financial volatility you mentioned at the top of the show. You see the Dow, NASDAQ, and S&P 500 sinking as a sign of doom. I see it as a necessary rotation. We are seeing AI disruption fears hammering tech stocks. NVIDIA, Apple, Tesla are all taking hits. Why? Because AI is fundamentally changing the labor market. We had a report that Spotify's best developers haven't written a line of code since December because of AI. That scares investors in the short term, sure, but it's the definition of a productivity boom waiting to happen. The market is messy right now because it's figuring out who the new winners are in a deregulated, AI-driven world.
That is a very optimistic spin on what looks like a capitulation. It's not just stocks. Bitcoin has capitulated near $65,000. Gold is sinking. Coinbase getting a double downgrade. These are assets that are supposed to be hedges against inflation or instability, and they are all falling. Investors are fleeing because the rules of the road are changing. You can't price in a trade war, a potential conflict in the Arctic, the end of the EPA, and a labor crisis in tech all at once. The risk premium is back, and it is massive. And frankly, relying on productivity booms from AI while firing your human workforce sounds like a recipe for social instability, not just market volatility. Who buys the products if the developers aren't earning a paycheck?
Social instability is a risk, I grant you. But let's look at the alternative. The alternative was a system where Europe was deindustrializing to meet arbitrary carbon targets, where the U.S. was subsidizing global defense while its own infrastructure crumbled, and where the global South was dependent on Western aid. Now we are seeing a shift. We see the U.S. putting tariffs on the table, we see Europe trying to overhaul its competitiveness, and we see nations like the Central African Republic choosing their own security partners, even if that partner is Russia. It's messy, but it's honest. It's a return to hard power.
Honest is a dangerous word when it involves dismantling the systems that prevented great power war for decades. I want to go back to the Munich Security Conference. You have Marco Rubio there, you have the German Chancellor. The mood is anxiety. They know that strategic autonomy is a polite way of saying you're on your own. And when you combine that with the revocation of climate findings, effectively saying we don't care about the long-term consequences, you are creating a world that is hotter, more armed, and less cooperative. That isn't realism to me, that's recklessness. You mentioned the Central African Republic choosing Russia. That isn't sovereignty. That is the expansion of authoritarian influence into unstable regions because the West has walked away.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently. I think the anxiety in Munich is the anxiety of a bureaucracy that realizes its time has passed. The liberal order you defend was often a cover for stagnation. The new blocs, whether it's the Saudi-led group in the Middle East or the deepening economic ties between Mexico and its neighbors, are dynamic. They are responding to local needs.
Even in the tech sector, look at companies like Aurora moving driverless trucks 1,000 miles in 15 hours. Innovation happens when you take the brakes off. We are taking the brakes off the global economy.
We are taking the brakes off a train heading toward a cliff. You mentioned the Aurora trucks. That's great technology, but it's another disruption to labor that we have no safety net for. You mentioned the U.S.-Taiwan deal. Great for trade, but it ratchets up tension with Beijing at a time when we need cooperation on climate and debt. And you mentioned the U.S. rolling back climate rules. That is literally accelerating the cliff edge. Even the insurance markets are starting to panic, pulling coverage from climate-vulnerable areas. You can't build a robust economy on a planet that is becoming hostile to human life, and you can't build a stable world order on the premise that it's every nation for itself.
On that, we have to agree to disagree on the timeline of that danger. But looking at the immediate future, the direction is clear. As of February 2026, the old consensus is dead. The U.S. is deregulating to re-industrialize, Europe is forcing itself to arm up, the Middle East is picking sides, the Global South is realizing it can trade horizontally rather than vertically.
On that, we agree. The old order is gone. The question is whether what replaces it will be a structure of stable regions, as you hope, or a chaotic free-for-all that leaves the most vulnerable, whether it's the climate-impacted nations like Peru or the workers displaced by AI with nowhere to turn. We are dismantling the levees right before the storm hits.
And that is the debate we will all be living through in the coming months. We are seeing a return to hard power and hard economics. It's a rougher world, perhaps, but one where illusions are in short supply. We will see which side the evidence supports as these new blocks solidify. Thank you for joining the debate.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.